Rothschild kicked out of Russia and Japan as world revolution unfolds. A world revolution is unfolding with historical events taking place in Africa, China, France, Japan, Russia, and elsewhere as the old planetary control grid continued to collapse. Multiple sources agree. Let's start with the revolution that was announced in Russia last week. Basically, David Rothschild was kicked out and the Russian central bank was nationalized. This is why half the government was fired, FSB sources tell us. Here is what our FSB sources have to say on the subject. It was supposed to start back in November 2019 when Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev was killed at FSB headquarters, but due to the presence in the country of a huge number of the richest Jews in the world, this operation was postponed. Then at the end of December, half of money was given to one structure, which organized the sudden departure of Jewish Premier Medvedev. The structure will oversee various ministries and all new ministers will be appointed under its supervision. On January 16, President Herman Gref of Federal Central Bank, Sberbank, got so drunk with grief that he was taken to Odensovo Hospital suffering from acute alcohol poisoning. That is why he suddenly canceled his speech at Gator Forum. On January 18, Gref told TASS News, "We should brace for the collapse of the existing world order. It will be very painful." The FSB sources also report that when Elvira Nabiullina, the head of the Russian central bank, was fired last week, all cell phones of central bank employees was confiscated and huge stacks of documents were seized. One other thing they report to us was that Yevgeny Zinichev, the head of the Ministry of Emergency, will become the head of the FSB. But this will also not be so long. The P3 Freemasons, who report a lot of very real stuff, tell us the Medvedev who was removed was actually an alien. Rothschild's slave, President Emmanuel Macron of France, is also under siege. He was forced to flee for his life from a threat last week amid rioting that has gone on now for over a year. A new French revolution is coming. French resistance sources promise. Equally dramatic, if less public, events are going on in Japan last week. A first cousin of former Emperor Hirohito tells us the Bank of Japan has been nationalized in that the Rothschild as well as the Rockefellers have been removed from control of this country. British royal family sources confirm this and say that Emperor Naruhito and Empress Masako has been inviting to the UK this spring, where among other things, they will discuss the creation of a World Future Planning Agency. Representatives of the P3 Freemasons, the British Commonwealth, the Asian secret societies are planning to meet in London, possibly in February, to discuss the creation of this agency. They will also discuss preparations for human colonizations for Spain, P3 sources say. The initial agreement is that the planning agency will be headed by a committee of 7 with decisions made by majority vote, according to a source involved in the negotiation. The 7 will include 1 representative each from Africa, the Americas, Asia outside China, Europe include Russia, India, and the Muslim world. Vetoes will be limited to the region making it. So, for example, if the world decides to ban pork, the Chinese could veto that and continue to eat pork in China. Speaking about pork in China, CIA sources in Asia say a major offensive is underway against that country. The Western media is now discussing the slaughter there of several 100 million pigs due to the outbreak of the new strain of African swine flu virus, one source say, noting, "Pork is the main food of the Chinese. It is consumed every day. America cannot replace the lost pork from the massive slaughter. You can imagine what will happen to the Chinese people without pork, which is their main source of protein. This is being kept very quiet for obvious reasons. China had half of the world's supply of pigs, with a population of more than 5 million pigs. This provides the main sources of protein for 1.3 billion people. The sources also told us the following. Xi Jinping and his cronies are behind the protesting in Hong Kong. His plan is to bring down Hong Kong into Macau and Shanghai into the new financial centers. China has been financing the protesters since the beginning. HSBC is in the process of moving their regional headquarters to Singapore. The Chinese government is planning on cancelling all leases that were made with the UK, meaning they will take over the land and buildings in Hong Kong. They are also planning on cancelling the Hong Kong dollar and will allow up to 6 months for all Hong Kong dollars to be exchanged to yuan. As you can see, China is going to destroy Hong Kong. They will, of course, shoot themselves in the foot, so to speak, as Hong Kong is their connections to money from the West. China will implode from within. Furthermore, the sources say, China has been kicked out of Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam. They are no longer wanted or needed. The same is true in Australia. The Aussie have had enough. The US also carried out a sophisticated attack on China via Japan, according to Japanese military intelligence sources. This was seen in the news as a fight between South Korea and Japan over historical issues. In reality, though, it was a present to stop Japanese export of key semiconductor manufacturing equipment to South Korea. This in turn had the effect of shutting down the Chinese semiconductor industry, the sources say. A new soft power structure is also going on with the Chinese over Africa. An example is this disinformation being sent about the British-led summit about Africa. According to this information, organized by Boris Johnson, the summit will host many heads of state and government leaders, companies, international institutions, international spy organization of espionage and counter-espionage, and secret societies to present investment opportunities in Africa and to discuss implementation of the New World Order. It will feature a discussion by the Supreme Committee entitled Millennium in the Control of the Black People. The actual summit summary published by the British government reads as follows. The summit will be hosted by the Prime Minister and will bring together business, governments, and international institutions to showcase and promote the breadth and quality of investment opportunities across Africa. The summit will strengthen the U.S. partnership with African nations to build a secure and prosperous future to all our citizens. It will mobilize new and substantial investment to create jobs and boost the mutual prosperity. In other words, we are finally seeing the Western answer to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. In any case, Chinese Freemasons, for their part, say that talk of a Chinese implosion has been around for decades and has always proven to be wrong. They say time is on their side because they have a superior system of governance and economic management, so they will continue to grow faster than the West. The Chinese are also now taking the lead on environmental protection, the sources say. Recent news items backing this include Chinese plans to ban single-use plastic and a 10-year fishing moratorium on the Yangtze. The offensive against China is taking place in the context of a still unfolding collapse of the U.S. corporate government in Washington, D.C. The regime there is paralyzed by infighting and stage events. The latest is gathering in Virginia featuring crisis actors, gun lobbyists, goons, undercover cops, citizen journalists, etc. There's also a fake impeachment show going on against U.S. President Donald Trump. The fake show distracts from the very real crimes of the end times evangelicals who now surround President Trump. We are talking, for example, of the recent attempts to start World War III in Iran with the murder of Iranian German General Qasem Soleimani and the shooting down of a Ukrainian civilian aircraft. The fact that the plane was remotely hijacked and flown towards an Iranian military base, a clear war crime, is now being reported by mainstream news outlets. Also, in a sign of a real break in the analog world, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is blaming the US for downing the Ukrainian airliner. This is happening as UK Defense Minister Ben Wallace says his country is ending its military alliance with the Trump regime. Pentagon sources too are making it clear they are tired of the political hacks in Washington, D.C. For example, the sources note that in a rebuke to former presidents, the Navy decided to name its newest carrier after an African American sailor instead of Bush, Clinton, or Obama. The Pentagon is also sick and tired of fighting as an Israeli proxy in the Middle East, the sources say. Congress is livid. The death of toll from Iran's missile strikes on the U.S. bases in Iraq is at least 139, making troop withdrawal an election issue, they say. A clear sign of how rogue the U.S. regime has become was when Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said, "Destruction of Soleimani is an example of a new U.S. strategy aimed at deterring its opponents. This applies equally to Iran, China, and Russia." Someone should point it out to Pompeo that assassination is a two-way street. The Trump regime is also doing things like threatening Europe and pulling out of NATO military exercises. Finally, we are hearing increasingly credible information about battles taking place in deep underground bases from multiple sources. First, take a look at the seismographs from the Indian underground nuclear test versus those from the natural earthquake. The recent earthquakes in Puerto Rico, around the China Lake underground bases, in Nevada and California, in Kumamoto, Japan, etc., all bear the signs of artificial earthquakes. Multiple sources tell us they have found treated in cages and other horrors in some of their bases that are now being taken over or destroyed by the White House. Japanese sources tell us that 40,000 Japanese children were being sold each year to the Khazarian mafia. FBI statistics show that 40,000 children go missing each year in the US. Many of them are now being rescued from cages in underground bases, Pentagon sources say. The 38-minute video at the link below provides good background information on this no longer very secret war. On a final note, we were told by our Antarctic sources that what's happening now on the surface of the planet is much more important. We will promise more information about the subject at a later date.